All right, good morning. This is, or afternoon, or whatever time it is, wherever you're watching right now. This is the KubeBuilder Controller Runtime and Controller Tools meeting for Thursday, November 19th, 2020. As a reminder, we are currently recording, so don't say anything that you don't want recorded for all of posterity. All right, I think we have two items on the agenda today. I think the first is from Phil, so why don't you take it away, Phil?
Great, thanks. I'm gonna try and figure out how to do Zoom sharing here. It's been a little while. Used to have Windows, but all right, let's try. Sorry, I just installed the Zoom and now it's asking for more permissions. All right, let's try that again. I'm back. All right, let's go. So there you go. That's what we get for the pre-recorded KubeCon talks. Universe is in balance again. Okay, so what I'm going to demo quickly is just like looking at kind of taking a look at different ways we can do the configuration generation for KubeBuilder projects. The kind of where I landed is that it would be really nice to have an abstraction rather than just pure patches, kind of the way we do it now. I think there's a lot of reasons that KubeBuilder is more complex than your typical bundle of configuration. One is that a portion of the configuration is actually generated from code, like the CRDs and the RBAC rules and some of the webhooks. And so you have the real source of truth for some of the configuration being the actual code directory. Some of the configuration is scaffolded it out at the time you create the objects. And some of the configuration is scaffolded it out at the time you or create the APIs, some at the time you create the projects. And then when you want to change something like enable webhooks, for instance, or enable the cert installer, that this involves like changing a bunch of different places in the files. And probably what you want is like, you just want to enable webhooks, or you want to disable them, or you want to have the cert installer enabled or not. And so I took a look at writing a customized function. So customize has this notion of functions, which are essentially programs that are able to generate, transform configuration, and you can drop them into a customization YAML and they can do arbitrary stuff. And so I wrote a customized function that works as a standalone program, which I'll demo now. It's called config.gen right now. And so basically you have this program here. And if I run it inside the KubeBuilder directory here, then it looks at the project file. And I added a couple fields to the project file here. This spec with image and enable webhooks, and then the metadata with the name. And so it looks at the project file and goes ahead and generates or runs the configuration generator or controller gen libraries. And so you can see it creates the custom resource definitions here, and then the roles, and does like all the stuff you'd normally get out of customize. But if I do something like, change webhooks to false up here, so you can see right now it has the validating webhook, and if my demo works correctly, it won't anymore down here. Yeah, you can see it doesn't have that webhook anymore. So it allows you to we can start to build out like high level fields that do arbitrary things, right? And so I can, for instance, I disable the controller manager creation and namespace creation and just do CRDs or these sorts of things. And I think what's interesting about this approach, and how is this different than like just doing a Helm chart? There's a couple ways this is different. One is that when I run this in standalone mode, I can actually take, the way I've configured this is it will actually take patches as additional arguments. So if you look at this patch here, it has like set the replicas to 3. And so if I run it with that patch here, you can see it sets the replicas to 3. If I run it without the patch, there's a little bit going on here behind the scenes, but if I run it without the patch, you can see its replica is 1. So the way I've written this is, by default, if you give it no arguments and you're in a KubeBuilder directory, it will look at the project file. If you give it 1 argument, that's the project file, or the API. It doesn't actually have to be a project file. It's anything with those fields. And then additional arguments are patches. Now, what's kind of cool about this is if I run config-gen here, cd, if I run config-gen here, it works like a customized function. So if you're running it in a container or running it as part of a customized pipeline or a kept pipeline or something like that, then instead of reading files from disk, it waits for standard in, and we'll have like patches or different things passed to it. And that means it also writes them out in the customized function format. So it's easy to chain this with like other modules or functions or plugins or whatever we want to call them now. And so you can easily then say, okay, I want to apply a namespace customization on top of all this stuff. And so we get the full capabilities of what Kustomize offers today, which is you can give patches, you can do common labels, common annotations, generate config maps, and do all that random stuff. But if you look at the like source directory here, we don't have this like directory bundled full of configuration where you need to comment and uncomment things to do high-level stuff and regenerate the CRDs. Constantly, like you just end up with kind of this very sparse directory where it's only the stuff that you care about. So that's the demo of using it. Any questions before I kind of show how this is, how you can implement something like this?
Real quick, maybe you talked about this and I missed it, but like where the things that are scaffolded, like during project initialization that kind of set out the boilerplate for the operator deployment or controller deployment, for example, is that encoded in config-gen or is there still some base file somewhere that exists?
Great question. Yeah, I'll show that right now in the
Okay.
implementation, how this is actually architected. Cool. All right, I'll go share a different tab now. That has so what I just shared was a what I just shared was like a new KubeBuilder project, right? Where one would use this. And so now I'm going to share the actual KubeBuilder project here, which is, this is like the real KubeBuilder code repo. And so there's a PR out for this. I think it's even linked on the doc, so anyone can go dig around in the code as they like. But I created this new directory right here just to hold this command. Right now it's a standalone command. And so the main.go is really simple here. It's just like executes a Cobra command. So the meat of it is really in this APIs directory. And so sorting through this, I'm leveraging pretty heavily a couple things. One is the customized framework for writing functions. There's a framework that allows you to do them as templates. I've decided to do them as templates simply because it was the easiest way to map our existing structure. And so as I implemented this, there's many ways we could implement it, none of which impacts user experience or the API or backwards compatibility or any of that. We can change this out and swap it for templates and then go to something else like manually writing objects and then back to templates or some combination of the above. Yeah, so the point is none of that actually matters from the perspective of the consumer of this tool. But I chose to implement as templates mostly to evaluate if this is a feasible option and if it's a clean approach, and it maps closely to kind of how we do things today. So I basically have this templates directory here, or templates field, where each one of the files that we scaffolded it out is now a template. So we can kind of fill in the different fields here based on kind of higher level values. And so this is like a structure I've chosen where I just have like exposed in the high level API kind of for each piece, the ability to either disable or enable it based on whether it's, scaffolded by default on or scaffolded by default off. So in this case, we scaffold the namespace by default. So I say, you can disable it here. Otherwise, fill this in and substitute this in here. And so here's the controller manager, again, created by default, scaffold in the image. I'm working hard to keep these very simple. Like the substitutions I try and keep very minimal without doing a whole bunch of like complex logic. And I'm able to do that because instead of just having like a template or just having a chart, this is actually run as part of a program. So I can scaffold out bases and then I can patch them later, which I'll show in a minute. So here's like the controller manager, and I say, okay, if you're enabling webhooks, create the service that goes along with the roller manager. And if you have, if you're not disabling the off proxy, again, like whether it's on or off by default, scaffold out the service for the off proxy. Here's the RBAC rules for the manager. Again, we can break these into multiple templates. Single template doesn't really matter. I chose this structure because I happen to find it to be mapping, I think, well to what we have today. So this is the RBAC for the leader election. Again, we just substitute this stuff in here. I find this a little easier to follow because it's kind of clear how all like these things are wired together. The metrics, the RBAC for the metrics proxy, on by default, Prometheus here, the cert manager, whether you're enabling cert manager or not. And so those are the templates, and I could make these templates more complex, right? So some of the things are here, like if you're enabling, different things, normally the controller manager would be changed, right? And so I chose for this particular demo to, instead of making this template complex, to keep it relatively close to, again, what we scaffold out. And the framework allows you to specify patches as well. So I've templated out the patches here. And so the patches have selectors. So we'd say, okay, apply, to these different kinds, this conversion webhook if you've enabled cert manager, right? And that again maps to the patches we had for those things. Already, it's a little bit different in that we're matching by kind and applying the patches to all those kinds instead of individually patching them. But effectively, this works very close. Again, the difference being you can just enable cert manager and automatically enables all the patches and the right resources being generated. Same thing here. If enabling webhooks, then patch, again, this is a patch we apply with customize, trying to keep that similar. If you didn't disable the off proxy, patch with the off proxy, again, maps to the patch we have today. And if you enable webhooks, again, another patch. So essentially we have similar to what we have today. We have, these templates, we have these patches, but both have some substitution capabilities. And then we combine that with a couple of things here. So looking at the framework, you have kind of these templates. Those are the templates that are listed. You have these patch templates. Those are the patch templates that are listed. We define this API here that's fed to the templates. But we also have this pre and post process step. And this allows us to do things that you can't really do just with patching alone. For instance, we have this controller gen filter, which generates resources. And again, this was what makes it fit into a customized plugin, is that it doesn't just generate, it actually takes resources customized would pass to it from other bases and whatnot. But then it calls the generator. So, it generates webhooks, generates RBAC, optionally, depending on whether you've enabled these or not, generates the CRDs here, and then produces the resources it got from the code. And so in the run function, you have kind of this pre-process that validates the input abstraction looks good. Then runs the controller generator or controller gen to produce the stuff generated from code, and then combines that with these templates, and then applies these patches on top of the stuff generated from controller gen and this templates based on kind of what you've enabled here. And then we can do some post-processing as well. So we get the full set of resources that have been generated as part of this pipeline and passed to us from customized, potentially from bases. And then we can do arbitrary like wiring or validation here and make sure that, for instance, that the templates, whatever was produced by the templates and the patches aligns well with, what's in the controller gen filter, or what was produced by the controller gen filter, and possibly throw a validation error if you have fields that don't make sense together. In this case, what we're doing is we're just sorting the resources. This is another nice thing. There's, we can have a lot of control over how we sort this specifically for KubeBuilder, instead of relying on what Customize does by default for sorting these things. And so for this, I just implemented this dumb little filter here that, I'm ordering by the kind of the resource, and then just do a little in place sort of the resources based on that. This is the API. So this can be written as its own configuration file or as part of the project file. Either one's fine. There's extra code in here just to check the project file. But you can see, so there's the directory, the name, the namespace, the image, and what you want disabled, enabled. And this will allow us to do other stuff too, like if we want for development mode, for webhooks to create, our own certificates and secrets in CA that are valid for like 1 hour or something, that would allow folks to just run config gen and then apply that and have like the webhooks working, almost immediately just after creating them without having to screw around with any certs or anything for their dev cluster, right? And that'll be valid for an hour or something like that. And then here's how kind of we test this. So I have this project here that just has some APIs and controllers here. And so we have kind of, if you have this configuration, this is what a configuration file would look like. It spells out that directory, says the image latest, and then this is kind of what it spits out. And then if you disable the auth proxy, you get a slightly different configuration. If you enable cert manager here, you get a slightly different configuration. Cool. Any questions?
I do have one if no one has one. How can you integrate this with the whole plugin system that we are developing right now? I mean, can you hook the pre-process and post-process functions that you mentioned or something like that? Or will we have to process the generated file at the end, the full configuration generated file?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I was thinking about. I think natively, this is going to integrate much better with for extension than most other capabilities, but it's going to look a little different. So rather than trying to like extend, like we could do something like crazy, right? Where we could be like, oh, we take a list of templates or something like that on the and then you specify templates and we override templates or patches or these sorts of things. That would probably be like the way maybe I'd think about it in the past. But the way this is intentionally designed is to compose as part of a pipeline. So for instance, if we either use Customize as a pipeline or kept as a pipeline or pick our own pipeline that's different than these, like you can write your own function, right? I'll share again. Share screen. So the way this is designed to work, right, is that these filter, this resource list that in this preprocessor, for instance, gets all the resources from some upstream thing in the pipeline. And so one way we could do, for instance, do extensions, right, is in the project file, which I don't have an example of here. But say, I'll just put in the comments here. So say you had something like this. You had your project file here. And so, you know, I'm specifying something like image foo, right? And then you can imagine we add like something like extensions, right? And then we have, you know, my extension here in the project file. And this, you know, this would be maybe a map. I'm just kind of off the cuffing here, kind of how you might do this, right? But like, so if you just say you have a map of like, you know, string to interface or string to, in this case, you could do YAML.node, which would mean basically anything parses. So you could have your extension here, and then you say, okay, some fields you care about is like, you know, policy, or we say like, say secure, that's true, something like this, right? And you want to generate the configuration based on this secure equals true. You can have the same project file, and then the way, essentially how we'd want to do this, and this gets down to us having some, choosing the right pipeline to do this stuff, right? But you essentially want to run this as in series, right? So it would be like, you know, functions, and then the first one would be, you know, name foo, and that would be the configuration API, right? Again, I'm making this up kind of as I go, right? This would probably look differently than it does today. I'm mostly to demonstrate how do you like, what is the best way to do extension, right? You can now do like this. And so what this allows you to do is actually compose arbitrary extensions in my extension, right? So this might be exec, you know, my config gen. When my config gen runs, it's going to get all the output from config gen. And so that means, and the total output of this, right, is going to be whatever my config gen ends up transforming, right? So that would mean if config gen is, if you want to patch a resource from config gen, you could write, you know, my config gen such that it finds that resource, selects all resources that have a label or by name or, you know, whatever it is, and then patches them. If you want to delete a resource, you can delete a resource. If you want to change the kind of a resource from, and then patch it to have additional fields like from deployment to stable set, that can be done. If you want to add new resources, if you want to, in theory, you could even like make a network call and, you know, find out some piece of data based on the user running the command and go make a decision based on that, right? So in terms of the capability and the flexibility, like kind of the sky's the limit. You can take whatever we produce and layer on top of it. It's maybe like, what are the best practices? Do you really want to be talking to network? Do you really want to be doing these things? Is like probably a different conversation.
Nice.
And yeah, I think this means that like, yeah, you can just add stuff to the project file here if you want to do extensions. And then if we just, you know, I mean, there's other ways we can do this too, right? Like I could even within here, we could do something like my extension and then, you know, provider exec equals, you know, my config gen, right? And like, again, like there's different ways we can design this, right? But if we add this to the project file, then then we could like actually down here, you could imagine in post-process, we do something like, you know, exec.command, whatever, right? Like my config gen, and then, you know, we do something like c dot set standard in equals, you know, whatever, like rl.items, you know, hand wave about how we convert rl.items. There's a format I'd call the right library, right? And then we'd say, you know, dot out equals buff, you know, the buffer, and then that's not what I meant, but you get the idea. And then, yeah, here, then it becomes like rl.items equals, you know, buff. So we could either do it this first way I demonstrated, where like this will be more flexible and powerful in the long term, I think, because it allows us to, you know, it allows us to separate like the orchestration of a bunch of different generators and plugins from the individual plugins, which I think is a better overall design, right? But if we didn't want to take that extra dependency on an orchestrator, and we're like, no, that adds layer of complexity or whatever it is, we just want it to be native and embedded. Like I could imagine like doing a very light embedding of an orchestration inside config.gen itself, just by parsing out these extensions and running them.
Okay. So from the plugin viewpoint, the first option you mentioned would be like creating a binary that it's called my config.gen, and it would be piped by an orchestration system, and you would forget about that, and will, I mean, the final project will only have like a couple binaries that are config.gen and the other config.gens from the different plugins, and they will be run when you try to deploy your system, right?
Right, exactly. This would look more, this, I mean, potentially this could even be like go run, you know, github.com like this. And then, right, and then you can control this. So then like in the plugins, we have like require, you know, my config gen is v, you know, 0.1.0. And so in that case, like bundled with the project, the only thing we bundle with the project is, you know, config.gen. And in theory, we don't even have to bundle config.gen with the project, because we could just in the make file go run config.gen directly from another repo. It doesn't actually have to be, but it could be. But then the other plugins, like, so for instance, if you were to write them as using that framework I demonstrated, then you could just run go run on that thing, and then this down here does the semantic versioning or pins it to a particular version.
Yeah. Really nice. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
So this seems really cool. So I'm Joe from Operator SDK team. I wonder, so we've got other phase one plugins, which what we've been calling them, which know how to scaffold different project types, so other than Go. So I wonder, like, does this same, and we might put different, you know, we might have different resources for some reason that you would want to use that are not the standard set of ones that we use for Go projects. Do you think that this could be usable in non-Go based projects? And it looks like they are. Like if you look at what the Operator SDK does for a Helm project versus a Go project, the customized config directory is basically identical, because at that point it doesn't really matter what the underlying language is. All that matters is like we're deploying some images and some other API resources to the Kubernetes cluster. But I wonder, like, would this be directly applicable to other language types? Like, would we just be able to just use it right out of the box, no problem?
Let me ask, so do you use controller gen for the Helm-based projects, or how do you generate the CRDs?
That's a great question. So no, we don't use controller gen because controller gen requires some Go types. Right now, the Helm CRDs are generated when you run create API and they just say allow all. For Helm in particular, if you have a Helm chart that has a values.schema.json file in it, you can use that to construct an open API v3 schema, but it's not a one-to-one. The Kubernetes API server is more strict than everything that's allowed in the API v3 schema. So sometimes you get into a situation where things break. So we haven't actually added that support in. So right now, to answer your question, I can't remember the name of the thing, but it basically is like, yeah, allow anything in the spec and allow anything in the status.
I think, yeah, this will work. Like there's like I'll qualify the statement with like some pieces of this will work. Some pieces of this we can make better. Potentially, like it's not inherently not going to work as well. And some pieces of this, right, if it's like the controller gen parsing from Go files obviously aren't going to work. So I'll give you a demonstration of kind of what I mean. Actually going to switch which screen I'm sharing. So going back to this one, this is like your KubeBuilder Go project, right? So so in the project file, so this has an implicit, like the directory is the current directory, right? So like, let's say I said that, directory was temp or something like that, where there's, no Go files. This actually, that might just blow up. Let me see. Let's say I make directory called empty, right? And so I call the directory, empty, so something like that, right? And then I do now run config gen, and then I'll give it the project file here. You can see that like it still generates all this stuff. It just doesn't generate anything from the Go, right? Like there's no custom resource in here because there's no Go in that project, right? And then if you switch this back to directory here, we should see the custom resource definitions. So yeah, a large pieces of this will work for non-Go projects, and we could yeah, if you come up with some technique for generating resources from other files or generating custom resource definitions from something else, then I believe it could be composed with this pretty easily.
Cool.
But was what I demonstrated kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, that was kind of my question. I wonder, we haven't encountered this in Operator SDK, but so there's kind of two more questions I have. So one is like, do we think there's a case where like, the customized things that we currently scaffold in these templates that are in config gen, which are kind of one-to-one, do we think there are cases where you would want to scaffold a KubeBuilder project that like uses something totally different than that? Or is this like our opinionated, like, nope, like this is the way to generate resources for any Kubernetes controller?
Different than, would we scaffold something different than what I demonstrated? Or the custom?
Which I think is a one-to-one to what is currently in the config directory of the current KubeBuilder project, right?
I see what you're saying. I think I do. So one thing different about this than the current approach is like, we're not actually scaffolding anything in this case, right? Like at most we're scaffolding the like project file to say the image, right, that you want to run and this sort of stuff. And in this case, what we're actually doing is we're embedding all of the logic inside a binary that is executed and is capable of producing the configuration, right? So I guess the difference between the scaffolding approach where, once it's scaffolded, your ability to make a completely different decision about the structure of the project or what sort of resources are produced or that sort of stuff is kind of gone, right? It's difficult to say, actually, like we're doing a new type of scaffolding and all the old projects would like to upgrade to this new type of scaffolding. But like, for instance, components would be a concrete example of that. Like customized components we could take advantage of, it would look different. What's different about this case is because like it's really the abstraction is the only thing that we have to be backwards compatible with. So if we were to say tomorrow, you know what, we're like, throw all of this out the window, you know, instead of having one controller manager for webhooks and the for one controller manager for all the controllers and the webhooks, we're going to have a separate controller manager per type and per webhook, right? Like, you know, or we want to at least enable that. With this approach, like making that, exposing that is as simple as updating the API to have a new field saying, split out or multiple deployments or something like that, right? And simply by adding that field, we then update the binary to, and use a separate set of templates or do something else, right? But essentially produce those resources. So we're not really locking ourselves into any particular set of resources or the same way we are when we scaffold with this approach.
So it's funny you're saying that. It reminds me of issues we had in the past with Operator SDK, where we actually we're doing a lot of plumbing of things in a binary, which made Operator SDK extremely opinionated, and is like, here's the way to produce this output. And we actually backed off from that, and we're like, no, let's hand control more to the users, so that we don't keep getting pinged like, hey, I want to do this one custom thing with the way that the deployment works. Can you add that code into the API so that I can do that? And a lot of times we end up either having to try to figure out how to plumb that in, or just saying no, because we became the controllers of all of the templates and everything that's in it. So I wonder if you can sit and I know with this, yes, you can patch, and there's maybe some release valves there. So maybe that's a good way to solve it. Have you thought about that aspect of it?
Yeah, the API allows you to disable, that's kind of where the fine grain, here I'll share again. It's probably worth thinking about what does Kustomize provide you, and is it possible to provide something comparable in experience? How does, I think your question is maybe how does this degrade when we cannot provide the things that the user wants in the abstraction, right? And so you mentioned, one thing is patching right in, it's oh, I want to set these random fields, right? So Kustomize supports that. Or because this is a customized plugin, we can, anything you can do with Kustomize to a base, for instance, you can do to this thing. Or you could use this as a base effectively. Then there's stuff where it's well, I can't do it with Kustomize because I don't want, the way you're generating that resource is completely wrong, right? So the controller manager, I want multiple deployments, for instance. And so that's where kind of the ability to disable, if we have fine grain disable this thing and you bring your own, right? I think then this degrades into, okay, you don't like the way we did the manager at all, right? You can't patch it to get it the way you want. Fine, don't create the manager. Instead create, and these aren't just actually patches, I think, or maybe they are. The way you do this is you put this as part of a customized pipeline, right? You bring your own manager, which is, the 3 managers you want. Those are your base. This gets overlaid on top of them.
Gotcha.
And we could make these finer if we needed to, and have it on an individual resource basis.
So you don't think so I guess maybe as a hypothetical, so say someone, we get all this out there, we get it in front of the users, it's now the default. And so, new projects are now using this versus the customized templates that we scaffold. And a user comes and says, hey, can you change config gen to do X? What our response is generally no. Here's a better way to do it within a customized pipeline, or is it, oh yeah, we'll add this one-off thing. And maybe it's, maybe I'm just simplifying too much and it would depend on what the request was, but I wonder
I
what
think
kind of the default stance is.
this is a great question. I think like the non-satisfying answer is it depends. But different ways we could like approach this, right, this is where could extensions come in, right? And if we say it depends on like kind of who the user is and how valid the case is and that sort of thing. But I could easily imagine, right, like if it's something like if a user is asking, can I add this feature? Right, like they're that level of competence where they're like, I would contribute this feature. I'm moderately capable in Go, right? Our answer would be, here's how, write your own framework, run the preprocessor, manipulate the resources as you want, and then in your own project file, define it as your own extension, right? And now you don't have to talk to us. You can do absolutely anything you want. You can add or remove resources, and you can configure your own project file to like not generate resources to simplify how some of are created. That would be, I guess, if someone is capable of programming their own thing. If it's like something like a customer where they don't want to create the thing, they just need you to be they just want the capability. Then I think our answer would still, if it feels like feature creep and it's like, okay, for this one use case that isn't typically general, then I think what we need to do is figure out how do we expose the ability for you to do it with Kustomize. That is like, I'd be more, if the ask was, can you, like right now you're generating as part of your templates, you have one knob for the, the manager and now this is actually pretty fine grained right now. Maybe this one. Here we go. I like the role binding. I want that, but I don't want the role, or vice versa, right? Okay, like can we split this out into two things, right? And then you disable the creation of one, and then you use Kustomize. Use this as part of Kustomize to bring whichever one we stopped generating for you. Seems reasonable.
And so like another example I can think of is like in the deployment, and maybe we're getting into details here and this is pointless, but like in the deployment where we have the resources that we have like hard-coded basically. So I can easily see someone saying like, yeah, those resources don't work for me. I want to change those.
Well, that's done with the patch, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd almost see us maybe having like a patches directory where people could just like store their persistent patches or whatever, and config gen would pick them up. I don't know if that's something you've thought about.
Let's look at it like, sorry, I'm switching back and forth here. So this starts to get into what does the API, right, look like, right? So say we had patches directories, right? And then, this is patches, right? Other patches. And then say we had something like additional resources directories, resources. Like we could do this sort of stuff here. And then this starts to look like the capabilities here are really close to what Kustomize offers, right? Like if you, let's see, so what can't you do if you can give us if you can tell us not to generate resources and bring your own, if you can apply patches to the resources we generate, and then if you can run this in a customized pipeline so that you can do common labels, common annotations, then the thing you don't get is, I mean, I can imagine the UX is I think 90% of the time UX will be better. If you're a user where you're like, you know what, I want to change some random field in the manager, and I don't want to create a new patch file. I just want to edit it in place in a scaffolded file. Maybe this will be a little bit worse.
I mean, I think one of the real questions is like, for me, is like, how many of our users like feel comfortable editing the scaffolded customized bases and patches versus like how many of them would feel more comfortable like just dropping in a patch? I think one of the things that that seems to be here is it's much more obvious as to like what's safe to change, right? Like at least to me, the customized directory was kind of, it's a little bit impenetrable. There's a lot of like weird like interlocking dependencies of files. Whereas this feels like it's a lot more like linear almost. Like I know config gen is going to spit out some files. I just have one set of patches. Everything in the patches directory is something that I own as a user or whatever. So like I can change that as needed. And I know like I am responsible for those files. It's not some weird like quirk of like, oh, Kubernetes requires this, so this patch file must always be here, even though like, and it's a patch file due to some weird quirk of customize or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. If it comes off as I don't like this, that's not what I intend. This seems like super cool.
No, it's great. Like I love going through all the possible things that can go wrong, so that like when we launch, we're only surprised half as much.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I definitely agree. Sorry, go ahead, Tully.
Oh, I just want to say, like, if we have any final comments on this for now, that's fine. Make them quick. We have 10 minutes, and there's one more thing that I think we should really cover because we said we were going to cover it last meeting. And we should probably move the rest of this discussion maybe offline to a design, like just like a quick proposal or the PR or something like that.
I'll put together a cap. I'll put together a cap. I'll take the feedback I got here. I'll put together a cap, and then I'll present again when the cap's done at a follow-up KubeBuilder meeting. Thanks, Ollie.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there. I just want to make sure we get this one last thing in. And then if we have any more time, we can go back. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to cover, because we said we were going to cover it for last meeting and we're overdue for a while, is just release check on controller runtime and controller tools. So for background, we said last meeting that if we didn't have any blockers in between the last two meetings, we'd go ahead and do a controller runtime release today. So I have two things. Say maybe here. I don't think there's currently any blockers from controller runtime that I saw in my brief glance yesterday. So like, did anybody encounter anything? Is there any, like, does anybody know of any stop the presses issues? And B, does someone want to do a quick screen share and we can quickly double check as a group?
I do have one PR that we might want to take a look at.
Okay.
I just posted it in the agenda. I can screen share as well.
Yeah, can you screen share? And we can add that to a milestone or something as well, just so we can track it.
1 second. Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Great. So this one in particular is bumping the default and test Kate's version to 1.19.2. We bumped all of the other Kubernetes dependencies, and this one's still on 16.4. So this should probably go in.
Did we end up resolving the issues There was one other thing that I saw. Did we end up resolving the 119 issues around the deprecation of the v1 alpha 1 webhook message version?
I don't think so. That's in, is that in this, is this in controller runtime or controller tools?
That was in controller runtime. Basically, the API server sends us webhook requests in a particular version, and we can't handle the v1 version right now. Or we could, and then they removed conversion between the two that we were relying on
Right.
to handle. I think,
I don't think that ever got figured out.
okay, I think we may need to figure that out as well before, because that was something that used to work and now it doesn't. We, at the very least, we need to have like a good message for why. I think this PR is currently has a, like, just splits it and duplicates it, so you have two different handlers. Okay, I'll take another look at this one.
You're talking about this one that I'm on right now?
Yeah.
Right. And I think the response was that we don't want to have two handlers. We want to have one and convert.
Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Putting people quickly on the spot. I don't know if there's a good way. Like, we could maybe generate our own conversion, but that seems like a little bit of a pain. I mean, v1 alpha 1 is deprecated in 119. So, like, this may not be a problem for a little while. It may not be another problem ever. Like, we may never do another version of the webhook message, but
I can take a crack at it. It's weird, right? Because like upstream is not providing us a way to convert between the two, but there probably should be, because I would imagine that webhook servers want to be able to serve both, right?
yeah.
So like maybe this is worth filing an issue upstream.
I suspect upstream's opinion is like, because the versions are separate, you handle them separately. Jordan seems to imply that we were slightly doing the wrong thing before and getting away with it by accident.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite perfect before. So, like, we may want to intentionally say, like, look, it turns out that we were doing the wrong thing before. The way to fix this in your code is add this extra line that handles both. If you're using the high-level webhooks, we handle it for you. If you're using the low-level webhooks, you have to handle the message yourself. Like, you have to handle the difference yourself.
Right.
Can I back up and ask, so is this all predicated on the original ask to bump the test version to 0.19, or are these separate? And my real question is does this actually block a 0.7.0 release, or could we file a bug or do this after 0.7.0?
This is a breaking chain. It is not related.
Okay.
I was reminded of it from this is the last thing to get bumped to 119.2. It, as part of the 119.2 upgrade, I think this is a breaking change that we made.
So it needs to come in so that we don't make another breaking change.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait until 0.8.0.
We did merge the 119.2 PR, right?
To bump the depths to 119.2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we should in our we should have a good answer. Kind of is my point here. Like if we're making that, we're gonna need to make that break in some capacity. It looks like because of the way upstream works, change things. We just need to have a good answer as to like why and what the migration path is, right? Like if we were like we mostly supported V1, your thing was working. Now it's not, and there's no path to support V1 anymore. That's kind of a shitty answer, right? Like that was kind of my point.
Yeah. And if this is what upstream apparently wants by implication, then I think that's an okay way to go about this.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take another look at this afternoon then, I guess. And then we'll resolve that and resolve the update and test dependencies as well. And then I guess we should be good to do the release.
Yeah. Can you let me know when you respond, and I can help out with whatever needs to be done?
Sure. Who would just to make sure I'm not confusing
Eric.
someone's voice. Eric, that was okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no problem.
Will do.
Awesome, thanks. Were there any other pull requests or issues that anybody would like to put forth to get resolved? Actually, let me add this to the agenda.
Yeah, I can add these both to the milestone afterwards once I
Okay, great.
get to my computer as well. But yeah, if you add them to the agenda, that would be great because that's just a reminder.
Okay, we can go through these, I guess. I don't know of anything else that needs to get in. So
Yeah,
the next release, would that be beta or would that be stable?
Do we feel like we need to do want to do a beta?
Probably not.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Usually in the past, I think we've done an alpha or a beta when there's like relatively major changes that we're not sure about.
Right.
I don't see anything here. So I think probably we just go to stable.
Excellent.
Yeah, and we've had 6 alphas, so I would agree.
Oh yeah, we had alphas already. That's right.
Yeah, lots of them.
Actually,
yeah,
7.
so we should be good then.
Awesome. Okay, I got to drop for another meeting. Thanks for going
Great.
through that.
Yep. Thanks everybody for joining, and I'll see y'all in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. See ya.